This is our first lecture of the 2017-18 academic year. And for those of you who don't know, the Haldane Society was formed in about 1930, and the idea is to provide a forum for discussion and analysis of law and the legal system, both nationally and internationally from a socialist perspective. But it's also a haven really for lawyers on the left and people on the left to come together in difficult times really. We have a varied membership, not just lawyers, academics, students, legal workers, trade union affiliates, and so on. Tonight's lecture is entitled, What Does It Mean to Be a Socialist Lawyer? And it's been billed really as a tribute this evening to Michael Seifert. For those who don't know, Michael Seifert was a vice president of the Haldane Society for many years, and he passed away in July of this year.
Sadly missed.
And he is indeed sadly missed. And he was a solicitor for a great number of years, and his career reads like a compendium of all the great kind of class struggles and representing class warriors throughout the years. He has represented, among others, striking miners in 1984, 1985, the Wapping print workers, Rodney Bickerstaff, Ken Gill, Ken Livingston, the ANC, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, just mentioning a few. He was, as Arthur Scargill described him after his death, as a true warrior for the working class. And in latter years, he was ever present at our lectures and parties, with an abundance always of anecdotes, allegories, and advice for young lawyers. And many of us will remember him best for his beaming smile, and he was always there with words of inspiration and encouragement for those of us starting out in our careers. I've just been told that we are in the process of setting up a recording of the lecture, so it will be online at some point in the near future. So on to tonight's lecture. We're delighted, as ever, to have our president, Michael Mansfield, Queen's Counsel, here. He, of course, knew Michael Seifert well, and the two of them stood shoulder to shoulder on many a legal battlefield, I think, and perhaps he'll tell us a bit about that during the course of the evening. As I say, he'll speak for as long as he wishes to, and then we can have a few questions at the end before moving on to the AGM. A few years ago, I interviewed one of our other vice presidents, John Hendy, QC, for Socialist Lawyer magazine. And during the interview, he said to me that really what's important is what you do with your time outside of the law. That's what's important politically. And the reason he said that was that the sentence which preceded that was that he'd always found the notion of a left-wing barrister an absurdity. So I'll leave that thought hanging in the air and introduce Michael. Please give him a warm round of applause.
Standing up. So, as long as you can hear, I'm going to sit on this. Is that all right? Can everybody hear? Yeah. And I'll just wait while people settle. Really good to come back again because there's hardly anybody in here I know. And I love that. There are one or two faces I know from the past, but the joy of coming to a Haldane meeting is that they are normally a spread of people I've never met, and a spread of faces, young faces, some starting out, some perhaps have started out already, and I think it's great. Really good to see such that generation, because I'm now a little older, and so therefore generations come and go. I obviously do want to talk about Michael. His sister is here, 2 rows there, Sue. And I have to say, as soon as she spoke, I realised that voice, the Seifert voice, very distinctive. There's another one there. And I have extremely fond memories of Michael. But I just wanted to, because it is about, the meaning of being a socialist lawyer, I want to sort of travel a bit. And today has been a bit of a voyage, which I'll come to in a moment, with Yvette, who's sitting in front right here. And today, in a way, is an illustration of what I've tried to do from the beginning and what Michael tried to do before I get into that voyage, I want to pay a tribute, just a fleeting tribute, to another lawyer who died very recently. Now, for some of you, the name will mean nothing at all. Others who are a little bit older will, yes, I do remember something about him. Jeremy Hutchinson. Is there anybody here for whom that name means anything? Yes, there are one or two. That's good. That's good. Because for me, there were two lawyers who, for me, it wasn't about, actually, socialism. It wasn't about politics. People get surprised. So where have you come from? I came from a North London, Finchley, Thatcherite background. My parents were both Conservatives. And I worked, and I've said in the book, so I'm not revealing anything, I worked for the Young Conservatives. And I delivered mail. Unfortunately, I now wish I'd dumped it, but I didn't. I delivered mail. So I come from a very different background from Michael. So my beginnings in law were different to his. Mine were, in fact, modelled, in a sense, not on theories I might have read about, nor on visions that I had, because, I'll be honest, I didn't really have those. I had a burning passion about injustice because I went to a university where I could see it on the doorstep in the Pottery. So I was at Keele University. And that woke me up a bit, and I thought, what is going on here? And it was the experience of life that made me sit up and listen and look and observe and take on board. Jeremy Hutchinson, along with another name you will know, because he's got and had very close connections with the Haldane, and that's John Platts Mills. So I see lots of nods for him. Now, the interesting thing about these two individuals, Jeremy Hutchinson, who died 101, 102 maybe last week or so, and Platts Mills was, that they had an enormous presence. Never mind their beliefs, because they both had very different beliefs. In fact, Jeremy Hutchinson stood as a Labour candidate. He then joined the Liberals and sold out virtually, but nevertheless, he maintained a certain atmosphere and ethos about his thinking that led him to act as he did in court. Just as Michael had a much more obvious, strident set of principles. But they converged, because both of them, in their own way, had strong impulses in relation to fairness, justice, human rights, and so on. It wasn't always dressed up like that, but that's what you saw in court with these two. They were living examples. And these days, I have to say, there aren't too many of those people around anymore. And there are lots of reasons for that, and I'm not going to speak forever. I'm going to allow you to ask questions. There are some, but they provided, for me anyway, something I never dreamt of, that it was possible to provide a challenge to what was going on and actually carry the day. Now, in Jeremy Hutchinson's case, one of the cases that really it hasn't been written up in quite the same detail as some of the other ones, dealing with obscenity, Romans in Britain, the Lawrence case, and so on. All of those have been written up, and Chatterley's Lover, all of those have been written up. But the one that hasn't really been written up was one I was involved in. It was called the ABC case because even the defendants had to have hieroglyphics. They couldn't be known by their full names because it was an official secrets case. But the madness was that the initials ABC actually stood for the names that were in truth their own. So this wasn't exactly, rocket science, but then nothing is and ever was to do with official secrets. A stood for Aubrey. Unfortunately, he died last year. Berry was a soldier. I was representing him. And Campbell, Duncan Campbell, who I believe is still writing, not the one that writes for The Guardian for politics, but there's another one who writes on scientific matters and in particular security matters. And what they were doing was, in fact, exposing a situation in which there was a ludicrous level of secrecy to do with GCHQ, which was never talked about, but was after this case, and the extent to which SIGINT, signals intelligence, and various signals intelligence posts were not known to the public. But actually, if you look carefully, they were published in all sorts of odd places. And this is what Hutchinson was trying to do, is to bring together in this one case the ludicrous nature of the allegations and the level of security surrounding the case and the level of secrecy surrounding the case that was attached to it. Now that was what his forensic job was, and we stood there, I sat there and marvelled at how he did this with great skill and with an intellectual acumen that, again, it's very difficult to reproduce, and you sit and wonder at somebody that can do that. But it wasn't all that actually at the end of the day thought, yeah, wait a minute, I should be doing this. He had a judge, Mars Jones, who actually was there were, in those days, you might call them hanging judges, really difficult individuals who didn't want to know, and he didn't want to know about this case. He was making life extremely difficult during arguments and submissions and so on for Jeremy Hutchinson. And Jeremy did something which I've always remembered, and I thought, wow, don't think I could do that. Maybe now I could, but I don't know. But certainly it takes a lot of doing. It certainly did then. He just stood up because he'd had enough of basically the barracking he was getting from the bench. And he assembled, in those days, none of this stuff here, none of this computer stuff. It's all on paper. And you have those little red ribbons and all that. So he stacked all his papers together. He got out his red ribbon. And he did something, and the judge knew exactly what was happening. And he very carefully and silently put the ribbon round the papers, turned it over, tied it up, and the judge suddenly realised that Hutchinson was going to walk out on the case. And it changed the whole atmosphere in the court. It changed, in a sense, the course. There were two trials, in fact. Essentially, plus there were others. It wasn't just him. It wasn't the cult of personality. It was him and others who were defending as well. Achieved a result in that case that was never expected in the first place. It wasn't a total acquittal, but it was sufficient to make a difference to the law, the Official Secrets Act. Just in the way Hutchinson, made a difference in relation to the laws of obscenity. Now that was courage on a high level, and that was a principled stand that he took. And for me, John Platts Mills did the same. I'm not going to take up time because I'm here for Michael Seifert. But John Platts Mills was doing the same sort of thing, but in a very different way. And was achieving the same sort of results, in a sense. Juries loved both of them because even though they came from different backgrounds, they were able to capture the imagination and the attention of jurors who are just ordinary people and deal with judges and keep judges at bay because of their own ability to argue and as it were, marshal submissions in a way made it very difficult for judges, as well as recognizing that these were people not prepared to be cowed. Now that's those two. Now Michael actually is exactly the same, only he wasn't standing up in court. He was doing it out of court in a quite unique way, in a sense. Now we met. That's Michael and I. We were. I won't say we were close friends, but we were friends. We understood each other. We met at school, at Highgate School in North London. The school's still there, as you may be aware. We came from very different backgrounds. He came, and some of them are here tonight, from a very distinguished family. And a family with, if you like, a political tradition with a small p, as well as a big one. I came from a family that had a tradition, but it wasn't the same at all. And we weren't in the same intellectual category. And at school, Michael and I went in very different directions. I became an establishment figure and a prefect and all that, and he didn't. And he was up to all sorts of things, which I knew about. And, occasionally I was asked to deal with. Well, whether it was graffiti on a wall to do with CND or whatever. And he influenced me a great deal because he got me to open my mind to what was going on in the world outside school. Just as was said a moment ago about the world outside the courts. And Hutchinson had a world outside the courts. John Platt Mills undoubtedly had a world outside the courts. And this is beginning to give an indication and a flavour of what a socialist lawyer was about. Now, I was beginning to pick this up. I was beginning to realise that the way in which you operate inside court is driven and influenced by what you're doing outside court. The kind of person that you are. It's not just a job. In other words, you're not, and I'm not saying all surgeons do this, but I mean, you're not just a surgeon, a body comes along, you cut it up, send it on next, and don't get involved. That was the thing that was being preached to me on a regular basis. Do not get involved. Do not identify with the client. And I was saying the opposite. Wait a minute, I'm looking at these other people, whether it's John Platt Mills or Hutchinson or Michael Seifert, they were doing precisely that, and I said, that's what I want to do. However, I was in an establishment set of chambers, and they certainly were not too favourably inclined to that approach. And it came to a head in one of the first trials we did together. And again, it's a case that I think there has been the odd documentary about it, and I think one or two books. And it's called the Angry Brigade case. In 1971, the case was at the Old Bailey. And it involved a number of, about 6, I think, defendants who had arranged together, some of them, because some got acquitted, so I better not say all. Half of them got acquitted and the other half didn't. Michael's half didn't and my half did. But that's no credit to me or discredit to Michael. But during this case, I didn't live very far away from Michael's home in Highgate, in Broadlands Road. Have I got that right still? Yeah, I've got the number, but it'll come back. It's important because this is something, it's like the doing up of the brief. Michael was in the same case instructing someone else for some of the other defendants. But some of them managed to get bail. The women got bail. The woman he was representing got bail through his own efforts and someone else. And the problem was how to get, where will this person live? Now this is where, you need to be outside court. And I hesitate to say it's a socialist that does it. It's somebody with a real feeling for life, humanity, and yes, that's socialism as well as. And he said to me, look, I'm going to offer to the judge, who was actually, unlike some of the other judges, James was there, I remember that, was in fact not illiberal. I mean, he had an understanding. So we didn't patch it together, but it was coming from him. Michael said, I'm going to offer my house, my home, for the duration of this trial. I don't think that would happen now. It wouldn't be allowed to happen now. But he argued for that, and he got that condition. But having got that condition, he says, well, Michael, how am I going to get her to court every day? So Michael had just got his first car, ever. And I said, well, I'll take you. I didn't think twice about it. I just said, I'll turn up every morning. If I get, Connie always did breakfast, terrific. We get breakfast and we take, this is a major, what would now be regarded as a terrorist trial, because the conspiracy was planting certain devices, not particularly explosive, in various strategic and token addresses in London. Cabinet ministers and so on. Maudling, I think, was living in Barnet. That was one of the addresses. And a bank, a Spanish bank in the West End, and so on. So these sort of token addresses were being targeted. And obviously various documents were being put out, manifestos and so on. And it was all aimed at the Industrial Relations Bill and the iniquity of the Industrial Relations Bill. So it had this political context. So that was all happening. So for Michael to say Anna Mendelssohn was her name, I think her father was the mayor of Manchester. I'm remembering this straight off the cuff. I haven't really researched it before I came in. But these things have stayed in my memory. And I remember Anna, a very assertive, strong woman. And so we started this procedure whereby every day I'd turn up at Rawlins Road and take her in my car with Michael to the Old Bailey. Again, something that probably, and was at the time, in the end, I was approached by counsel on the other side. And why? Because he lived in the room next to mine. He was actually one of the top prosecutors, and I was in the top prosecuting set at that point, as a novice. I just started, 1971, hardly out of, legal nappies. So I was right there. And he was prosecuting, and I was defending, and people on the outside could never understand how that could be. And of course, in those days, that wasn't common practice or common situation, but it wasn't uncommon. So I didn't think twice about it. Anyway, and because I didn't think what I was doing was terribly wrong, I thought I'm doing somebody a favour here. Actually, I'm doing the state a favour. And I'm doing her a favour so she can have a decent life and helping Michael out and all that. That's how I looked at it, on a human basis, which is, if you like, the beginnings of my socialism. Because obviously I talked to Michael a lot and he influenced a lot of my thinking at that time, just as the other people I told you about who'd been in court. And so we talked a lot, and we took her every day until eventually, I'm not sure whether the judge got to know, but certainly the prosecutor did, and he came and he saw me and he said, "What are you doing? You are putting this," because of course his view of these 6 defendants they were guilty as charged, and aren't you afraid that she'll leap out of the car and disappear? Because we stopped at a confectioner's every day, and she nipped in and got some chocolate to go. I mean, all these things you think, Now, this is a story, I think Jane Dighton wrote a tiny little bit in The Guardian with a slight reference to all of this, but not the developed story. So you're the first people on earth that have heard this since then. And it's an important story for me because it formulated for me what we should be doing as lawyers outside the case. And it actually permeated through to many other cases I've done since. And so this went on, and I said to, as John Matthew was prosecuting, I said, look, it's very kind of you to consider my difficulties of, having to probably be imprisoned if she skips bail. But I believe her. I don't think she's going to skip bail. And I think, she's, from that point of view, no problems. You may have problems with the case and so on. So he said, well, you're going to go on doing it. I said, yes, I'm going to go on doing it. I've done it up to now. The case went on for 9 months, an extremely long case. In those days, cases lasted a few weeks. But 9 months? And so we went on doing it until the end. She never did. She unfortunately was convicted. My client, who's now very well known, but I'm not going to mention who it was because names have changed, and I don't think she'd thank me for going back over raking up old coals. But basically, I learnt a lot in that case. I learnt a lot from the defendants themselves, because the jury said to the judge, have mercy. Again, very unusual. Jury recognised that all of them, including obviously the ones acquitted, were principled young people who were concerned about the world. They may have been going about it in a way that could not possibly be condoned, but at the same time the jury recognised this, and James reflected it in the way he sentenced. So this was a remarkable case. So I saw in one case, with one person I'd been at school with, and thought, we were really rather different, and actually, bottom line, we were really rather the same. And after that, Michael was obviously very active in all sorts of campaigns, and Russell's just gone through some of them, so I'm not going through them all. But what I then took from the seeds of this was that basically I should approach all cases in this way. Now, not all cases are susceptible to that. And sometimes there isn't a case. Sometimes it's literally a cause. And I became, I think, a cause-based lawyer. I'm concerned to ensure that causes that obviously fall within the bracket of a socialist agenda, but not all of them do, but require articulation and require a voice outside the court as well as inside the court. Now, obviously, you can't talk about the case you're dealing with, but you can talk about issues that surround the cases that you do. And so as I progress through, I can name them, and it's not about me, but and Michael was sometimes in some of them. The other, I did a lot of Irish cases, I did a lot of cases to do with Notting Hill, where I'm back now, again, doing Grenfell and so on. So a lot of cases, he wasn't always involved in those, but we came together again with Arthur Scargill, the miners. And the Haldane were obviously involved in all that. And at that stage, I wasn't even a member of Haldane then. I still hadn't made it. I still hadn't made all the connections that brought it together, but I felt I had from Michael the inspiration about what was going on to the miners. That was another education for me through him and through a client. Well, a lot of clients, actually. The miners as a whole woke me up to the iniquity and the oppression of the state at that time, which has not finished. Because one of the cases, I'm not sure that Michael had clients in this particular one, but it's a miners' case, you will have heard of, because the battle continues to this day for the miners who were, or achieved an acquittal at Orgreave. Not just an acquittal, actually a case that was thrown out, was dropped. It was ridden with lies and fabrication, and that we're trying to get, well, at the moment, the powers that be, as you might imagine, aren't particularly receptive to anything other than Brexit, but we're trying to get a proper public inquiry into that. And just because, as Amber Rudd said, well, no one died, did they? You think, actually, the injuries to some of the miners were dreadful. Absolutely life-threatening, and some of them have lasted their lifetime. And so nobody may have actually died in the same sense. But that's what we're struggling to do. But it was Michael's ability to put it all into a political context and, in a sense, give me a sense of history, which I kind of needed because I didn't know it. I came to all these things fresh face, fresh experience, willing to learn, willing to listen, and at the end of the day, willing to do what the other barristers I mentioned did, and John Platts Mills in particular, obviously, but Hutchinson also, is just to challenge, to stand, and not to collude. And there is, obviously, with the pressure of economics at the moment, and the lack of legal aid, and all the other pressures that are on, huge pressures filtering from the bottom, often through solicitors quite different to Michael, who feel they've got to, as it were, do deals, pleas of guilty. All this kind of pressure is there. And it's still needed that there are, and I'm not saying there aren't any, but it still requires figures who are prepared to stand firm for the principles and act outside the court in relation to the campaigns that surround the issues behind the cases. And that's how, and throughout that period, when I got to know Arthur extremely well, I represented Arthur, as did Michael. And we were up in the end, we virtually lived in Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, and we recognised that this was bigger than the case. And the battle went on afterwards, and obviously others that you know about, John Hendy and the trade union movement, and also we were working in parallel as a team, eventually with one purpose in mind, all of us coming from slightly different backgrounds. But the importance now, because I want to really bring it right up to date, because the last meeting I was here, I think it was the last one I addressed, Michael was sitting 2 rows from the back, right here. And I can see him now, the beaming face, always welcoming, always loyal, always came to things that we did together. I'd go to his things in Cuba and so on, and he'd come to mine. And that support is extremely important, even if all we do is smack hands together and walk out. There it is. There he is. That's it. I remember all that. The warmth of solidarity, which is something we need to nurture even today. But the reason I think it's important to nurture that is because of the oppressive global as well as national situation in which we live, economically and socially oppressive. Now, The Guardian, to give them their due over the last month, have been doing a rather good job again of exposing this rather raw side of the society in which we live. And it was only yesterday that they had a full report in the financial section on the Credit Suisse figures about wealth and poverty. And this is one of the reasons we have a job to do. That 1% of the global population owns 50% of the wealth. And I don't need to elaborate it because many of you here will understand all that. One sentence describes the situation. And in addition to that, they've had the Paradise Papers on the back of the Panama Papers. So we all know who is stashing it away. If you like, I'm going to call them a phrase that Michael would have used and I would use as well. There's a ruling class still. They may have changed some of the faces, obviously, but some of them not. They're still there, still operating in the same way, still holding on like mad to not only wealth but political power. So therefore, the need to challenge that power whenever possible, the challenges are becoming more difficult. And more difficult because where do you get the resources to do the challenges? Well, there are ways of doing it now. And I've been involved in one campaign where I haven't actually ended up doing the cases. And fortunately, there haven't been too many of them so far. But the illustration I give, people say, well, how can I make a difference as a socialist lawyer? I say, well, actually, let's take, if you walk, we've been in the House of Commons, I'll come back to that today. They've got a whole thing there today demonstrating digital House of Commons and so on. And at the end, they've got these boxes in which they say, we want you to put a ball in the one you think is most important. Is it the environment, mental health, or education, or whatever? Anyway, I just thought for a minute, and I thought environment. Because the environment is environmental issues get pushed to the side. And they get sort of compartmentalized, oh, well, the Greens will deal with them, or whatever. But it's actually an issue for all of us. And it is about social equality. It is about a form of capitalism that is raking in profit before people. And the companies, usually American, moving in for fracking. Fracking is an issue I feel strongly about. And I became involved with those groups. Not to do their cases, but to give them support and direct them in ways in which do their cases if they needed it, but actually to give support and indicate how they can challenge. Judicial review being one of the main ones. So they say, how do we do this? And then, although now it's very common, crowdfunding. You shouldn't have to do this. You shouldn't have to do it. Legal aid should be there, and the judicial rules that have been, review rules that have been changed, shouldn't have been changed. But there's still a possibility for raising opposition to that kind of policy. Now, there are lots of other things going on at the moment which require, if you like, legal input, lawyer input, not just in court, but outside court, to provide people with the hope of challenge and the solidarity of challenge. Because in some of these issues, you need to connect with other countries. It's not just here, because the issues are global. And so, another one that eventually is sitting here, and I have become involved in as an issue over the last month. And it may affect some of you here. It may affect you in the future. And that is the pensions issue for women of a certain age. Now, women of a certain age, you may recognise, are not going to get their pensions if they're born in one half of 1954, they get it. If they're born in the second half of 1954, they don't get it. They don't get it when they're 60, when it was promised, and they're not now going to get it when they're 66, until they're 66. It's estimated 3.5 million women, and it's estimated something like £40,000 each person. Now, I feel strongly about that. I feel that's another iniquity. And in a sense, it's bound up in human rights, it's bound up in fairness, it's bound up in justice for ordinary working people, ordinary working women who plan their lives. And we've had a deluge of letters as a result from people who say, you know, and this brings me to the other area we're working in at the moment. There's enormous stress. Some of you may be students still studying here or wherever in London. The stress factor on everybody as a result of the globalization of capitalism and a lot of other factors as well is huge. Every single day, the ability to get up and face the day for ordinary people is actually really difficult. It's writ large when Yvette and I go to Grenfell. There it is. They've had everything taken away in an extremely rich borough. So you have it wherever you look. There's a microcosm in Grenfell, but there's a macrocosm when it comes to women in the United Kingdom, and an even bigger one when you look at the environment nationally, and an even bigger one when you look at the war zones that there are. So, and the armaments trade and where the United Kingdom sits in all of that. So this greater context, which requires those of us with a conscience to be involved in, and sometimes, obviously, you're not going to get paid. You're not going to go into it for the money. Sometimes you will get paid, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll have to subsidise it. Sometimes you'll have to crowdfund. But it is, and in the case of the fracking example, which I started with, it's made a huge difference because they suddenly recognised that actually very conservative elements in the community are getting a little upset because their estates are going to be undermined. And so, essentially, you'd be surprised when people come together in order to fight a common enemy being the destruction of the environment for the benefit of global corporations, which some of them would have invested in had they thought about it. But this is the thing. This is perception, and I think the person that's a woman running the Ecocide campaign who was dealing with this, Polly, I don't know whether you know Polly Higgins. Anyway, she was doing this, and she was absolutely staggered by the amount of money that she raised on a crowdfunding basis to take an action against this particular company. It was in Sussex, this one. Once they knew that this was happening, that the community were coming together in some way, they withdrew. Well, of course, they've come back. So the battle has to go on. You hand the baton on to the next generation, and you don't give up. Perseverance is required here because they expect you to roll over and disappear. But that's not going to happen anymore. I think there's a different feeling abroad now amongst communities. They're not going to put up with shit and general stuff. They have been, as we've seen, interestingly, in some of the elections recently. So there's a very different atmosphere that is tangible, that you can touch in such a way that there are consciences awakening. And that's why it's a brilliantly challenging time, but a desperate time for most people, which brings me to the reason we've been down here today, besides here, is we've been to the House of Commons because Yvette and I have been involved in another network, another campaign to do with suicide. Because as some of you may know, my daughter committed suicide 2.5 years ago. Now, again, you say, well, what's this got to do with it? I say it's got a lot to do, and I think Michael would have appreciated exactly how it touches on people. Because mental health, no, it's not been on the agenda. And the meeting today was an alliance of various groups working together. And what we're trying to do is alert people to not just the risk of suicide, but the stress factor in everybody's life. And we should have points of contact, points of communication. Again, something that Michael was very good at. was making the contact and making the communication between groups and between people and bringing them together, particularly over the Cuba issue. That's where he came into his own. And in a way, I feel I'm doing the same, only it's a different subject matter. So continuing a tradition which he began. So I'm particularly pleased that this was an opportunity to expand on the mental approach that is necessary from all of us. We have a collective responsibility to ensure that the excesses and iniquities and the arbitrary nature of global institutions plus national governments plus parties do the same. It is to drag it back and fight it, on every corner, so they know they're going to be challenged, even though they may think they can avoid what is coming. So basically, the message, as always, as Michael would have wanted it to be, is, and he might have even raised his fist if he was sitting 2 rows on the back. It's solidarity. It's not a dirty word. It's an essential word that we must share and stand together. That's where the mental health issue comes important to me, as well as all the other issues that we're concerned with. And certainly in relation to Grenfell, standing together is extremely important when you're sort of rock bottom. And so that message, I'm sure, will go out from Haldane, but needs to go out from all the other bodies which we're associated with. And I think finally that is some sort of thing where the constituencies are now ready for that kind of message. Now what I would like to do is to, I don't know, I've probably spoken for too long. My goodness, have I spoken that long? Right, yes, they always say barristers take 4 minutes to cough. I've taken a bit of time. I've just found myself bound up in the culture that Michael represented. And so for me, it's meant a great deal to come here, especially with relatives here as well. But what I'd like, if there's time, is for, if you have any, thoughts, comments, questions about all of this, if you're starting out on a career, and I know there's somebody in the room who is, you've got a burning question as to, well, this is all very interesting, but how's it going to translate for me? That sort of personal question, or what are the issues that you feel most involved? Whatever you want to say. So over to you if you want to pitch in at this stage before you get to the next stage of the meeting.
Any questions? Yes.
Well, it's not a question. Perhaps I should introduce myself. I'm Bernard Marder. I joined the Haldane Society in 1952. I can't say a lot about Mike. I knew Mike Seifert well. He came regularly to the lunch club that I run. And I liked him, I admired him, I respected him. And he is sadly missed. I think when you talk about solidarity, one of the things that strikes me about Mike particularly was solidarity with the Cuban people. He never flinched. He represented the Cubans here and represented the Cuban Solidarity Campaign for years and years. It was a wonderful thing. But having said that, I thought perhaps a little anecdote about my pupil master, John Platts Mills, was of interest. I'm actually a retired judge, and when I was sitting in Knightsbridge Crown Court some years ago, and John was then, I suppose, in his late 80s, and I happened to see him on the corridor, and I expressed some surprise that he was still working. Mike will remember this voice. I can't reproduce it. He said, Bernard, he said, my clerk tells me there is work for me to do until I'm 90. And then there's a pause, and he said, but not beyond. And then there's another pause. But then the bar was always a precarious profession. And in fact, he went on, he never retired, and my recollection is that he went to Northern Ireland, Bloody Sunday inquiry, with strict instructions from you, Mike, not to utter a word. Is that right?
Well, yes, it's true, because I knew John very well, obviously.
Yeah.
And I knew that he didn't want to retire, but I thought, well, I couldn't be in the inquiry for a few days or a week or something. I said to John, would you like to sit in? But you don't know anything about it, because he didn't. But that wouldn't stop him saying something.
Well, exactly.
And I just said, I think, just listen. Anyway, he went, they all loved him. Of course they did. And he was asking all sorts of questions which had nothing to do, but nobody minded what he was doing. When I went back a week later, Savile leaned forward and he said, Mr. Mansell, I think you are a shadow of your former self. Which I thought was quite a good reflection. Now, John, the reason why I was keen that John didn't say anything was that just before then, and before I started doing something, we were in a trial together. Now, I won't tell you the stories about how many there are, but there was one particular one in this case. After lunch one day, we were waiting, and John didn't appear at the Old Bailey. And I thought, he's a bit absent-minded, but what's he done now? And there are two courts that look exactly the same. Two smaller courts than the old courts. And he hadn't come into the one where I was. He'd gone into the next one. But he didn't realise. And nobody liked to say anything, and he sat down. And the judge in the other court thought, oh, well, he's probably come for an application of some kind, what have I done? Kind of thing. And so everybody's looking at John, and John was looking at him. Do you wish to move, Mr. Fletchmill? Knowing that the phrase is used occasionally. So he stood up and he said, well, I'm obliged to Your Lordship for asking me this opportunity. I have been waiting. He looked at the doc. He said, the man I'm representing. And the judge said, pardon? This man are you representing? And he had pince nez, which were down at the end of his nose. And he looked and he said, it's been a change of... he used another word to do with curriculum vitae. And so he said, well... And he did it all in Latin suddenly. Apparently, this is what he said, because I wasn't there. I was in the other court waiting for him to come back. And the judge has sent a note along the corridor to my judge saying, listen, I've got him in my court. Can you have him back? So this is why John had to be restricted. But on the other hand, he was brilliant in his day. I mean, there's another whole story about, loads of stories about John's cross-examination. A bit like Jeremy Hutchinson. Brilliant in the way that they were able to lead a witness into the biggest hole they've ever dug without them realising what they'd done. Both of them could do that. But and I think that they need to be remembered in their own way. But so Michael's part of that generation in a way, and so am I part of that generation. I like to think I am anyway. And I think this is the sort of, I feel, the impetus that needs to be carried on by people like yourselves here.
May I also make a contribution?
Yeah, sure.
In 1949, I was articled to Bill Sedley in the firm of Seifert.
Oh, right.
And Mike was not just on his own. He was the inheritor of a wonderful, proud tradition of the lawyers of the left. On my first week in articles, I was taken on by Bill and Ziggy to the Haldane Society. And on my first job I was given, I was sent to Clerkenwell County Court to sit behind the wonderful Ralph Milner, representing a group. In that day, what happened, Ridley Road Market in Dalston was a place where on Sundays the fascists would put up a box and speak, and Jewish ex-servicemen would go on to protest, and there were a little shouting and fisticuffs. And Jewish ex-servicemen were then arrested by the police and charged, and fascists never were. And this was so what I'm saying was, Mike grew out of this tradition. There's always a cause, there's always a need, and the wonderful support of left-wing lawyers and of the Haldane Society is creating the tradition which Mike emerged and you have emerged, and all you young people are going to inherit. It's a wonderful thing, and I wish you all well.
Thank you.
Let's say go to quarter two or just before, if that's not too much, mate. And then
No. I've got plenty of other stories.
That's okay. Can you just explain we're recording just to make sure everyone's happy?
Just to reiterate that we are recording. I think Melanie has a question, and then Adam.
Yes, hi Mike, thanks very much for fantastic speech, as always. I
fundamentally believe in the idea that what matters is what we do outside of our legal work, and for this reason I've participated in a number of direct actions over the years, most recently at Stansted Airport and stopping a deportation. I think the treatment of people of insecure immigration status is absolutely shocking, fascist. I think it's incredibly important that we stand with those people, as you said, show our solidarity. I think if we don't do it, then many of us will be next. I just wanted to say that I think movements are really, really strong when different groups of people join up. So when affected people can work with intellectuals, academics, everyone has a skill, everyone has a talent. We all need to be part of the struggle. But in particular, people of insecure immigration status are so incredibly vulnerable and precarious, and their lives are regulated and controlled in every single way. For my part in that struggle, I'd love to work with other lawyers. There's all sorts of ways that people can get involved in the campaign to end mass deportations, which is what I'm involved in. We have a trial coming up in March for a very, very serious offence. I believe we're charged with such a serious charge because of what we did, because of the issue, because it's immigration and it's such a politically contentious subject. If anyone wants to find out about how they can get more involved in the campaign, I'd be grateful to hear from them. But also if you have any comments in general about...
Yes, I'm doing the case, so I've got to be careful, especially as it's going out and recording. I'm not at this rule. You're not supposed to talk about cases in which you are involved. You can talk about issues coming from other cases. I think as you spoke, something that I think I would just like to mention. Don't worry, I'll come to the next one. Hope you've got half an hour, not 50. No, it illustrates, I think, in a way I haven't used it, but it actually, I was thinking back as you spoke that this isn't about the deportation case, it's about Hillsborough. But the seeds of Hillsborough obviously were with the families from the beginning that they fought. But actually, there was a turning point for them. And it came with a visit by some of them to my chambers and to me. And that was at a stage where they felt there was no hope. They'd been turned down by everybody. We hadn't got to the stage of an independent review and Pillsbury and all that you've now heard of. None of that had happened. And they were rock bottom. And at that point, it was necessary to provide them with some hope and solidarity, which I hope that I did give at that point, because I'm usually very positive and I usually believe perseverance, patience and standing together matters. And I'm sure they would have carried on even if they hadn't spoken to me, but it was important at that point that I think back that this was before there was any case of an involvement with the people who you feel strongly about have got an issue. They obviously had an issue and it's being made very public now, but that's only one example of a great many others, and Mel's case is another example of that. There are plenty of those examples, but they're not always plenty of people willing to stand by, help, go and help, and spend a lot of time doing things which, at the end of the day you may not necessarily get paid for, but that's not what it's about. It's about ensuring that these people, the people she's talking about particularly, 16 of them arrested, extremely serious case, are properly represented and politically represented, not, some sort of rather narrow situation. Now, Stephen, who sits right here, was involved in another one that we did together to do with the Rotherham 12, which was successful, but it was done thoroughly, but it was done with a political context. And the people involved, from the solicitor, Matthew, I don't think he's here, but a Michael Seifert figure, who actually spent time with all the individuals who'd been attacked by essentially what is equivalent to what was the National Front then, but is now British National Party, the English EDL, and all the other dreadful organisations. He spent time with them. He spent time going through the evidence. He spent time getting the barristers to talk to each other and make sure that they had a consensus. He was a Mike Seifert figure, absolutely vital. But he also was speaking to some of us, whether converted. So we were all keen to have solidarity. And actually it percolated through to the people we represented, because they had an element of solidarity there, just like the Hillsborough case. So I think the example you've given is an extremely good example of where there is a lot for us to do, but you have to make it known and identify where you can give your services best. So that's two more examples. Anyway, sorry, there was somebody there.
Adam agree, yeah.
I totally hear what you're saying about immigration. Before I was called to the bar, I spent 17 years flying the world as a trolley dolly, and we used to regularly say, we don't think this person's safe to fly, get them off the aeroplane. It would be children with mothers. It would be people, their fingers would be bleeding, and trying to hold on to the door. I was a trade union representative, and I went to the aircraft when they sat on someone's chest for so long that he died on the aeroplane. And the crew returned that and told, I was there, so I know these are the exact words. What the fuck do you want? Get back on the aeroplane, you've got a job to do. He's an immigrant. And the police stood there and were like, fine. Pilots were fine. Can we march them off the aeroplane? And I was suspended for that, for inciting industrial action. So it's awful what they do to people. So there are people on the aeroplanes who support you, and contact the unions of the airlines, because there are crew who are sympathetic. They realise what I was up to, so I never went to Jamaica again. I never went to Ghana, I never went to Nigeria, because I would throw people off the aeroplane. But there are people who can help you. Back on track. I practice in West London as I'm one of the Law Society panel on mental health. I appear before the tribunals. I do lots of legal aid mental health work. And so I was delighted when we heard that mental health is going to be the new target of more funding pouring into the NHS. We get our 300 million a week back. It's all marvelous. So I'm yet to have some nice shortbread biscuits on a ward, but I'm sure they're coming. But I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I run my files as thriftily as I can, and even the most simple cases, it's easy to make a loss on them. Companies can't afford to do that kind of work. We operate from West London as far north as Birmingham, west to Cardiff, down to Dartford, because there is just no coverage. The strap line with invest in mental health is great, but it just isn't coming to fruition. I don't know what advice you have on how to kind of push things forwards.
Well,
it does just seem to be a headline at the moment.
Yes, you're quite right. That was the meeting today, and that was the message today from the word that the Minister of State dealing with health was there, made a short speech, fairly innocuous, but supportive. The Shadow Minister was there, and the Labour MP for Liverpool was there, who's leading it all. The message that was coming across very clearly from all the organisations was, yes, it's great that it's been put on the agenda, but nobody's seen the benefit of the money that's coming through. So the actual practice have not dramatically changed. And part of this meeting today was organised by the NHS in Merseyside, so that they are aware of all these particular deficiencies. But I think that the one good thing about today was it brought together a point that just made a lot of including our own group, but I mean, a lot of different groups came together, and the ministers and the shadow ministers can be under no doubt that the anger that is there, that's the interesting thing. What has changed, I think, from, for me over the last 10, 20 years, has been a palpable sense of rising anger amongst the public who are fed up with being sold all sorts of goods that don't match kind of thing, and the austerity package and all the rest of it, and at the same time they see what's going on with the wealth that's being pocketed. So I think the anger that's there is such that today it will be difficult for the politicians who were present in the room, and for a change they were present, to go away without realising that, there are a lot of people with their eye on the ball. There are a lot of organisations now. In fact, I think we were both surprised by just how many there are who've come in, filled the gap over the last 2 or 3 years, because every organisation now has got is attempting to consider mental well-being. I mean, we did one for the bar earlier this year. Even the bar has woken up to the fact that there is a serious problem for most people, the stress factor problem, which can lead to all sorts of dreadful things. So the mental well-being as an issue is taken off. Now we've got to force government to ensure that money that they claim they're siphoning off for mental health is ring-fenced and does get to the people who really need it. That's the problem. But it's not going to happen unless we watch it. I mean, it's like everything else. Take your eye off the ball and they'll get away with murder. So it's up to, if you like, I think it's called, what's the alliance called today? Anyway, there's a mental health alliance that's come together today. They launched a campaign today. It's all onto a website. I think being part of that and ensuring that wherever you've got a lever on a politician, you pull it every time. I know it's sort of, it's kind of, in a sense, it's not exactly revolutionary politics and it's a bit sort of reformist, but nevertheless, these are the things that can work. And I've seen change in the short time that we've been involved. Sorry, somebody wants to.
Can I say, perhaps the way of dealing with this is, I think I saw Rhiannon, someone over here, Martha and Natalie. If you, there's a couple. It's
okay.
Let's keep going. And Mike's, sorry, Sue, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But we want to hear from you for sure. So can we perhaps take 3 to get one after the other, and then Mike can respond, and then we'll see how we're doing for time. I think we're going to break through the 7:45 barrier fairly comfortably, but I'm not concerned yet. So, Rian, and then, this chap had his hand up, and then Martha, perhaps you can ask your questions one after the other, and we can have a response, and then I'll try and take another batch, if everyone will bear with us. Thank you.
Mine's Rhiannon Davis. I'm a mental health lawyer too, and on Monday I got up at 4:30 in the morning and I represented a young man with Asperger's who's been held in a secure unit since his teenage years for 7 years, for no good reason, but I can identify he's got quite severe Asperger's. I've had to spend many hours with him because he likes to go through reports line by line and give me lots of details and then try and get his evidence in shape so he comes across to the tribunal as someone that they can discharge against doctors' wishes. Now, I know the Legal Aid Agency are going to fight with me tooth and nail not to pay me for all the work that I've done, because they will say that I've spent too long with that client. They don't have, the caseworkers there will have no experience of people with this kind of disorder. I've got 10 years as a lawyer, before that 15 years as a psychiatric nurse. I know what I'm doing. I did enough work to get this gentleman out. And I want to say it's important what we do in work as well. The Law Society did a report on legal aid, and they hardly mentioned the conditions and the pay. They said legal aid is a marvellous thing, it's important to our justice system. What they didn't mention is us as workers, if you want, who deserve to have a living wage. I'm a principal of a firm. I'm worse off than I was than as a nurse. I feel very sorry for my trainees, because they're training in legal aid, and if they continue down a legal aid path, they will never be able to buy a home. God knows when they will be able to move out from their parents even to rent anywhere, and they will have no pension. Now, I think the Law Society as representatives are a about as much use as a chocolate teapot, to be honest. They and Unite is, they make it's nice times. They don't do anything. Unite is trying to unionise lawyers. I went to a legal workers branch. I think the week before last. It's quite small, but they are trying to get lawyers together. I'd like to see, proper trade unionists actually challenging the government rather than the cosy chats that the Law Society have with the Tory party. And I want to ask you what you think about unionisation of the legal profession and what steps you think we can take to achieve it.
Well, funnily enough, I joined the NUM for that purpose. Anyway, not many people know that. But yes, the short answer is absolutely right. That's the avenue.
The chap in the blue who's writing. Did you want to ask a question? I thought you had your hand up before. Sorry, the gentleman behind you. Yes. And then Martha, if you want to chip in.
Seifert, a former member of the Haldane, and someone who only got past part one of the solicitors qualifying. When I remember very distinctly watching Stephen Lawrence's father on television apologising to union leaders who were anonymous, who provided the money so that he could get the police to inquire into his son's murder. And since you mentioned, I am a member of the oldest pensions organisation in London, but since you mentioned the pension case of women born at a particular time, I think there are about 20 odd trade union retired members associations. And I've often felt that maybe progressive lawyers, in alliance with 20 odd trade union retired members associations, might be able to do something concerning the women. That's all. I do vaguely remember a fellow called Candler who spoke about the Legal Action Group when the College of Law was in Lancaster Gate about 1970, but I don't suppose that's relevant anyway.
I'll just try to keep this brief. This is a rather personal comment that's been triggered by what people have said. In the 80s, when I was living in London, it's a very long story. I was told I had to leave the country, and I found a wonderful lawyer who you will know, Larry Grant, he was amazing. I'd go to his office, and he would. It was a Friday afternoon. He'd take out the bottle of whiskey and said, but he said to me, he said, we are going to fight this case. And he said, I'm not asking you for any money. He said, but he looked me in the eye and he said, you will pay me. I know you will. And at the time, I was so angry with what was going on, I thought to myself, no way. But we became good friends. And when I joined Haldane, I was really, really delighted to meet Michael Seifert, because I knew that he had been a partner of Larry's. And I always said to myself, I always enjoyed talking to him, and I always said, he's somebody I want to get to know better. He wasn't that old, and now I lost my chance, so I just wanted to make that. The story behind it is a very long one, but I just wanted to add that comment because it became a very personal thing for me. And it encouraged me to go and qualify as a human rights lawyer.
Do you want to say anything about any of those contributions?
No, thanks.
I think I will have to say 8 o'clock because I fear that we'll be evicted from the room at 8:30 and the AGM may take longer than that. Can I think I'll draw a line by saying, Natalie, you had your hand up, and then I think if no one minds, if I could finish on Sue, because as Mike mentioned, Michael's sister is here, and I think it would be great if she said a few things about him. I'm sorry if not everyone has an opportunity. We're just really stretched at this point. So Natalie, would you like to?
Yeah, just in relation to getting various groups and campaigns together, and also in relation to the migration issue. There's a case which a number of Haldane barristers are working on next week. Tuesday the 21st, there is going to be a demonstration that's in relation to the Home Office detaining and removing, their policy of detaining and removing European nationals for alleged rough sleeping. So that's a case where there's been quite a lot of campaigns as well, and I would encourage people to come along to that outside of the administrative court. The question I have, Mike, is just in relation to mental health. I know you said you spoke in relation to the bar wellness, or whatever it's called these days, but in terms of the conditions that we face with the junior bar, which are absolutely dire, no money, no work-life balance, particularly for those with the predisposition to mental health issues. I'm curious, not only in relation to the more general professional well-being, but I'm curious what we as socialists can do in the Haldane to try to protect people who are coming through the ranks in terms of mental health, whether or not there's any practical suggestions, because I think it's something that the Haldane should get involved in.
Well, I'm going to answer it quickly. I mean, I think that two answers. One, obviously, we are concerned to address the political agenda which has led to that. So changing policies, if we can, and ensuring, because there's a lot of support, even from the judiciary, about the legal aid situation generally, which is, as you put, dire. So attacking the policies. In terms of the practical level, which is what Yvette and I are doing, is encouraging. I mean, I'm going to describe it very simply, but it's working. And I think Haldane could do this. And we're happy to facilitate, aren't we? We could come here and do it. We could do it, well, not now, this minute. There's enough here to do it, tonight. What we do is we go into a room like this and we indicate, we have a little film that goes first, introduced by Ruby Wax, in which she talks about mental well-being, and then I talk a bit, and other people talk, and there's a barrister in it, who some of you may know. And, but there are lots of other people, a footballer and so on. We're trying to get voices to speak, often for the first time together. So what we're not providing advice, we're not providing, expert opinions on anything, because you're the experts, and we're saying you, individual people, should reach out to each other and talk to each other, because Ruby has this thing in the film where she says, I want to be able to look into somebody else's eyes and see myself, because she was admitting she suffered from depression. She said, the moment you feel there's another pair of eyes feeling as you do, you begin to change. I think, you should have opportunities to do it, not always have, intensely, wonderfully educational political meetings, but sometimes have emotional, psychological meetings in which a group come together and you just spend, we call it now a safe place to talk. Just say talk. You'd be surprised. Because, another hobby horse of mine, I'm afraid the computer age has taken over, the screen culture has led to isolation, it's led to globalization. I know there are all sorts of benefits. There are also a whole load of very detrimental effects on our human condition. Enough from me, anyway. Over to you. No, Susan.
Just to say quickly, as a head teacher, a retired head teacher, my school serviced the Finsbury Park Mosque, so I'm very well aware of what you've all been saying. And I have to say thank you to many a lawyer here who managed to rescue many families of mine from being deported and taken off in aeroplanes, and children. And also to Jeremy Corbyn, who was our local MP, who I'd always send the families down to, and he was always there for them and still is. So just to mention that. But Mike, just to say thank you very much. I think you captured my brother rather well. I think you missed out a few of the things which I won't mention here, but as his sister. But to say one of the things which and you're quite right. So we were brought up in a socialist left-wing legal family. Bill Sedley, my uncle, and my father, Sigmund, and it was a wonderful upbringing, very rich. But to say, one of the things we always taught, and which I'd like all the young people in this room to take away, whatever happens, you must always laugh at yourself first. And that, I think, is what Michael always did. And but thank you very much, because I think you captured the essence of his life and everything he believed in. So,
thank you.
No, I think I've said more.
Can we just thank Mike again for coming down tonight? He obviously